Human soldier Jeffrey Scott's eyes snapped open. Inside a sterile alien regeneration pod, gasping for air as advanced Talaxian revival technology dragged his consciousness back from the endless black void of death. Jeffrey groggily took in his surroundings, sleek bulkheads, blinking control panels, a large viewport revealing the star-flecked endless expanse of space. A tall, grey-skinned alien, wearing a crisp white uniform, stood over him, large black eyes studying Jeffrey intently. The alien spoke, its voice oddly calm and resonant. "I am Science Officer Belos of the Talaxian starship Indomitable. You have been revived after 300 years of cryogenic stasis. I'm afraid I have grave news. Humanity was completely wiped out centuries ago in the devastating Orion War against our shared enemy at the time, the Zorgon Imperium." Jeffrey's breath caught in his throat as the crushing weight of Belos's words hit him like a sledgehammer. Everyone he had ever known, friends, family, fellow soldiers, had been dead for centuries. He was completely and utterly alone, a living relic of a lost civilization. Jeffrey clenched his fists, muscles tensing as he fought down a surge of despair and existential dread. Belos continued grimly. "The Zorgons have surged back with a vengeance, overrunning our defenses and slaughtering Talaxians by the billions in their relentless conquest. In desperation, we have revived you and 5,000 other human soldiers from the Orion War era. Your species' legendary combat abilities and unconquerable determination are the last hope for the Talaxian Republic. We need you to do what you do best, kill Zorgons." Jeffrey shook his head in disbelief, the sheer enormity of his new reality still refusing to register. He looked at Belos, eyes burning with barely contained fury as he snarled, "You think you can rip me out of the time I know, tell me everyone I love is dead, and expect me to fight your damn war for you? Why the hell should I lift a finger to help you Talaxians after what your kind did to us during the Orion War?" Belos's large eyes narrowed and his grey skin paled even further. "Because if we fall to the Zorgons, those monsters will reanimate the rest of the 200,000 cryogenically frozen human soldiers in our vaults, not as free men like you, but as mindless Zorgon cannon fodder stripped of sentience and free will, fated to spend eternity as soulless biological robots. Is that what you want for the last remnants of your once great species, Jeffrey Scott?" Jeffrey blanched, his worst fears confirmed. He and his resurrected brothers-in-arms were the final guardians of humanity's dignity against an enemy that sought to pervert and defile their very essence. Slowly, Jeffrey Scott stood to the full towering height of an Imperial Terran Ranger, fists clenched in barely restrained fury. "I guess I don't have a choice. But let me make one thing clear. I'm not doing this for you or your precious Talaxian Republic. I'm doing this for humanity, to make sure those Zorgon bastards don't steal the last shred of dignity we have left. If I'm going to war again, it will be on my terms, and may whatever gods are left have mercy on the Zorgons, because my men, and I sure as hell won't." Despite his misgivings, Jeffrey reluctantly agreed to whip the resurrected human soldiers into shape to take on the Zorgons. Belos led him to a cavernous training facility deep within the Talaxian ship. As they entered, Jeffrey stopped dead in his tracks, eyes widening in disbelief at the sight before him. Row upon row of human soldiers stood at attention, clad head to toe in sleek black-powered exoskeletons. The armor plates hummed and whirred softly with advanced servo motors and integrated tactical systems. Each soldier carried a menacing energy rifle that crackled with barely contained destructive potential. It was like something out of a sci-fi vid from his own time, but here it was, in the flesh. "What the hell is all this?" Jeffrey asked incredulously, reaching out to wrap his knuckles on the nearest soldier's chest plate with a dull clank. "Powered armor, plasma guns. This tech is centuries beyond anything we had back in my day." Belos nodded, hands clasped behind his back. "Zorgon troops have physical abilities far exceeding baseline humans. These exosuits will allow your soldiers to match their speed, strength, and resilience in combat. The pulse rifles can burn through Zorgon chitin armor and put them down for good. With this edge, you may stand a chance." Jeffrey let out a low whistle. "Can't argue with that. All right, you sorry sacks of shit, listen up, he barked, easily falling back into the role of grizzled drill sergeant. Just because you've got fancy gear doesn't mean you're ready for a damn thing. Time to train until you puke, sleep, then train some more. I'll make real soldiers out of you if it kills me. Again. As the weeks blurred by in a haze of endless drills and combat sims, Geoffrey had to admit he was impressed. The men and women under his command took to the new weapons and armor like they were born for it. He forged them into a cohesive fighting unit, bonded by the shared knowledge that they were all that remained of Earth's once mighty military. Sergeant Amir Youssef, a giant bear of a man who'd served in the Egyptian interplanetary forces, acted as Geoffrey's right hand. Private Ava Petrov, a whip-smart Russian soldier with a gift for tactics, quickly distinguished herself among the recruits. Geoffrey even found common ground with Corporal Feng Su, a Chinese marine who shared his disdain for the arrogant Talaxians. Together, they were the beating heart of humanity's last warriors. The only dark cloud was Admiral Jean, the Talaxian commander who viewed Geoffrey's unit with barely disguised contempt. He was a hard ass, even by Geoffrey's standards, constantly breathing down their necks and pushing for immediate deployment. "So your soldiers are ready enough, Terran," Admiral Jean growled impatiently after observing a training session. "Further delay is intolerable. The Zorgons draw closer by the day. I will not let your hesitation doom us all." Geoffrey got right up in the Admiral's face, matching his heated glare. "My men are not disposable pawns for you to throw into the meat grinder, Jean. A few weeks of training isn't enough to—" "You forget your place, human," Jean hissed. "You are a weapon, nothing more. A blunt instrument to wield against the Zorgons. I am your superior, and you will deploy when I command it." Geoffrey clenched his fists, barely resisting the urge to deck the arrogant alien then and there. He whirled away, storming off in a huff before his temper got the better of him. That condescending prick had no idea what real human soldiers were capable of. Predictably, he found Belos on the observation deck, staring pensively out at the stars. The Talaxian science officer was the only one Geoffrey could halfway stand on this damn ship. "He's going to get us all killed, you know," Geoffrey fumed, coming to stand next to Belos. "Jean doesn't see us as real soldiers, just meat for the grinder. The moment we stop being useful, he'll discard us like yesterday's trash." Belos sighed heavily, his black eyes somber. "I wish I could tell you that you're wrong, but the truth is we Talaxians are staring into the abyss of extinction. You humans are the only thing standing between us and total annihilation." He placed a slender grey hand on Geoffrey's shoulder. "I have faith in you, Geoffrey, and in your soldiers. When the time comes, you won't be fighting for Talax or for Jean. You'll be fighting for the memory of Earth and the last remnants of your people. You're humanity's last hope." Geoffrey swallowed hard, the weight of that responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. He'd never asked for this, but here he was, the last guardian of his species' future. He couldn't afford to fail. Not again. The strategic briefing was already underway when Geoffrey and Belos slipped into the crowded room. Admiral Jan stood at the front, his face grim as he gestured to a holographic star map. Angry red icons representing Zorgon ships swarmed across the display like locusts. "The situation is critical," Jan said, his voice tight. "The Zorgons have broken through our lines in Sector 9. New Thaxis and its 3 billion civilians are now at risk. Our forces are in full retreat." Geoffrey's heart sank as he studied the map. The Talaxian ships were scattered and disorganized, no match for the relentless Zorgon advance. He glanced at Belos, seeing his own fears reflected in the science officer's dark eyes. Admiral Jan zoomed in on a small blue icon at the edge of the map. "We have only one card left to play, the human soldiers. They're the only reserves we have available to plug the gap." Every eye in the room turned to Geoffrey. He squared his shoulders, meeting their expectant gazes head-on. His troops weren't ready, not by a long shot, but there was no other choice. "Oh, he'll do it," Geoffrey said, his voice ringing with a confidence he didn't quite feel. "The Zorgons won't know what hit them." As the briefing broke up, Geoffrey pulled Belos aside. "I don't like this," he muttered, watching Admiral Jean stride away. "Jean's throwing us to the wolves. He doesn't think we'll come back from this." "I'll watch out for you," Belos promised, gripping Jeffrey's shoulder. "Focus on keeping your people alive. Leave the politics to me." Jeffrey nodded grimly and went to find his soldiers. They were already gearing up, checking weapons and sealing their armor. He could see the tension in their faces, the knowledge that this was no training sim heavy in the air. Sergeant Youssef fell in beside Jeffrey as they boarded the transport ships, his powered exoskeleton whirring softly. "What's the plan, boss? We going in hard and fast?" "Hard and fast," Jeffrey confirmed, slapping a magazine into his pulse rifle. "We'll hit their flanks, buy time for the Talaxians to regroup, and, Sergeant, leave none standing." The human ships tore out of hyperspace at the ragged edge of the Talaxian perimeter, and Jeffrey's breath caught in his throat. It was a scene straight out of hell. Talaxian and Zorgan ships clashed in a storm of fire, missiles and energy beams crisscrossing the void. Fighters swirled and died like sparks from a raging inferno. And in the distance, the green-blue jewel of New Thaxis hung vulnerable, hundreds of Zorgon ships driving relentlessly towards its defenseless cities. "Holy shit," Private Petrov breathed over the comms. "There's so many of them." Jeffrey shook himself, tearing his eyes away from the carnage. "Cut the chatter, we've got a job to do." But as he led the dropship screaming down towards the planet's surface, a cold knot of doubt settled in his gut. What difference could a few thousand humans possibly make against a force like this? They'd need a miracle to even survive, let alone turn the tide. But he'd be damned if he'd let his doubts show. His soldiers needed him to be strong, to lead them through the fire. The Zorgans filled the skies above New Thaxis, their monstrous ships disgorging hordes of chitinous warriors. Jeffrey could see columns of smoke rising from burning cities, the distant screams of civilians reaching them even through the roar of the dropship engines. 30 seconds, he barked over the comms. "Remember your training, watch your sectors, cover your buddies. We go in hard, we hit them with everything we've got, and we don't stop until every last Zorgan is dead or off this planet. Am I clear?" "Hurrah!" his soldiers roared as one, the dropships shaking with the force of their cry. Jeffrey's hands tightened on his rifle as the ramp slammed down, alien air whipping at his face. He could see the Zorgans swarming below, their insectoid bodies glinting in the harsh sunlight. This was it, humanity's last stand. Time to show these ugly bastards what Terran steel was made of. "Move out!" Jeffrey hit the ground hard as a barrage of plasma bolts sizzled overhead, the acrid stench of ozone burning his nostrils. All around him, the human soldiers crouched behind mounds of rubble and wrecked vehicles, energy rifles spitting blue fire at the advancing Zorgans. "Hold the line!" Jeffrey roared over the chaos of battle, rising to one knee and drilling a trio of shots into a charging Zorgon trooper. The alien warrior stumbled and fell, ichor spraying from ruptured plates of chitin. "We're all that stands between these bugs and 3 billion civilians. If we fall here, the Talaxians are finished." Private Petrov scrambled up beside him, her face streaked with grime and sweat beneath her helmet. "There's too many of them," she cried, panic edging into her voice as she fired wildly down the street. "We can't hold them back." Jeffrey grabbed her shoulder, giving her a rough shake. "Get it together, soldier. This is what we trained for. These civilians are counting on us." He pointed to a distant spire rising above the city's skyline. "We fall back to the Thaxis Commerce Tower. Move!" The human soldiers broke cover and sprinted down the rubble-strewn streets, plasma bolts cracking past them as the Zorgans surged forward. Jeffrey saw Sergeant Youssef catch a shot to the chest, his armor sparking and hissing. The big man stumbled but kept running, his face twisted in a grimace of pain. They reached the base of the Commerce Tower, just as the first Zorgans rounded the corner behind them, the aliens' serrated mandibles clacking with bloodthirsty anticipation. Jeffrey and his troops piled into the lobby, energy beams shattering the glass doors and ripping chunks from the concrete walls. "Defensive positions," Jeffrey barked, soldiers scrambling to take cover behind thick structural columns and overturned desks. Petrov, Fung, get those deep packs rigged. I want this whole damn building ready to come down on my signal." The two soldiers nodded and sprinted for the stairwells, satchels of explosives bouncing on their hips. Geoffrey could only pray they worked fast. The Zorgons were closing in, their numbers seeming to multiply with each passing second. Sai's clawed hand seized the edge of Geoffrey's barricade, a nightmarish insectoid face looming over him. He shoved his rifle barrel into the Zorgon's mandibles and pulled the trigger, painting the wall behind it with shattered chitin and ichor. "Come on, you bastards," Geoffrey snarled, ejecting a spent power cell and slamming home a fresh one. "You want this planet, you'll have to dig us out of the rubble first." The battle raged through the tower's lobby and lower floors, the human soldiers fighting with the desperate fury of cornered rats. Geoffrey lost count of the Zorgons he put down, his rifle growing hot in his hands as he poured shot after shot into the oncoming horde. A clatter of boots behind him announced Fung and Petrov's return, their faces grim. "Charges are set," Fung reported, snapping a quick salute. "Buildings rigged to blow from top to bottom. Just give the word." Geoffrey risked a quick glance out the shattered windows. Zorgons were pouring into the square outside, a chittering tide of chitin and claws. They had only moments before the aliens swarmed the building and overwhelmed them completely. He keyed his comm, his voice ringing out to every human soldier still fighting. "All units, fall back! Get clear of the building!" As his troops broke cover and sprinted for the rear exits, Geoffrey held his ground, energy rifle thrumming as he poured fire into the Zorgon ranks. Just a few more seconds, just a few more to buy his soldiers time to escape. The Zorgons surged forward, clambering over the barricades and the bodies of their fallen kin. Geoffrey glimpsed Sergeant Youssef, lying motionless against a pillar, his armor rent and blackened. Private Ava screaming as a Zorgon bore her to the ground, claws tearing at her helmet. With a roar of defiance, Geoffrey thumbed the detonator switch. The world vanished in a storm of light, heat, and sound. Explosions ripped through the tower's support beams, millions of tons of steel and concrete crumbling in on itself like a house of cards. Geoffrey had a momentary sensation of weightlessness, of flying through the air amidst a maelstrom of dust and debris. Then everything went black as something heavy slammed into him and the world spun away into oblivion. He came to in a haze of pain, every breath sending spikes of agony lancing through his chest. Geoffrey pried his eyes open, blinking away the blood trickling into them. He was lying half-buried in a mound of pulverized concrete and twisted metal girders, the remains of the commerce tower rising in a jagged mountain of rubble around him. Through the settling dust, Geoffrey could make out the huddled shapes of his surviving soldiers, bloody and battered, but still alive. Beyond them, the street had vanished beneath a ridge of debris 3 stories high. Broken Zorgon bodies jutted from the rubble. The aliens' advance halted for now. Geoffrey dragged himself upright with a groan, his muscles screaming in protest. "Sound off!" he croaked into his comm. "Who's still with me?" One by one the human soldiers checked in. Youssef, Ava, Fung, a dozen others. Out of the 100 who had made the drop, barely 30 remained. But they had bought New Thaxis precious time. The Zorgons would not roll over the planet unopposed. Geoffrey staggered to the edge of the rubble and stared up at the smoke-streaked sky, the taste of blood and ash thick on his tongue. The battle still raged in orbit, the flash of ships and missiles visible even in broad daylight. He knew this was only the beginning. The Zorgons would regroup, come at them again and again until the cities of New Thaxis lay in ruins and the planet's defenders were ground to dust. But Geoffrey would be damned if he'd let that happen without making the aliens bleed for every inch. His soldiers gathered around him, their faces exhausted but resolute beneath the grime and blood. They looked to him, ready to follow him into hell itself, if that's what it took. "We hold the line," Geoffrey said, his voice hard as he met each of their gazes in turn. "We hold until there's no one left to hold it. The Zorgons want this planet. They're going to have to dig our bodies out of the rubble and pry it from our cold, dead hands. We're humanity's last warriors. It's time we reminded the galaxy what that means." Jeffrey's comm crackled to life as he crouched behind a shattered wall, energy bolts sizzling overhead. "Jeffrey, come in!" Belos's voice was strained, barely audible over the cacophony of battle. "Admiral Jan has ordered the fleet to withdraw. He's leaving new Thaxis to the Zorgons." "He's what?" Jeffrey roared, fury and disbelief warring in his chest. "That spineless son of a bitch, he's abandoning us?" "Not all of us," Belos said urgently. "Many of the officers refuse to obey Jan's orders. We will not abandon you, Jeffrey. I'm bringing every ship and soldier still loyal to reinforce your position. Hold fast, we're coming." Jeffrey clenched his fist, a fierce grin splitting his face. "You heard the man," he bellowed over the comm to his soldiers. "The Talaxians are on their way. We just have to hold these ugly bastards a little longer." A ragged cheer went up from the human lines, and they poured renewed fire into the advancing Zorgons. Jeffrey rose from cover, his rifle spitting blue plasma bolts as he led the charge. "Drive them back, for Earth, for Talax, for every world these monsters have destroyed." The humans surged forward, a tide of black armor and flashing energy weapons. They met the Zorgons head-on, the air filling with the shrieks of wounded aliens and the crackle of pulse fire. Jeffrey was in the thick of it, his rifle blazing as he carved a path through the chitinous horde. But for every Zorgon that fell, two more seemed to take its place. Jeffrey saw humans dragged down by sheer weight of numbers, vanishing beneath piles of thrashing alien bodies. The line was buckling on the verge of collapse. "Hold steady!" Jeffrey cried, desperation creeping into his voice. "Just a little longer, they're almost here." As if on cue, a shadow fell over the battlefield. Jeffrey looked up to see dozens of Talaxian dropships screaming out of the sky, energy cannons flaring. The ships disgorged hundreds of Talaxian marines, their sleek armor painted with the colors of Belos's faction. The marines charged into battle with a roar, portable energy shields flaring to life before them. They crashed into the Zorgon rear like a hammer blow, plasma cannons cutting bloody swathes through the aliens' ranks. "For Talax," Belos roared, a plasma rifle in each fist as he led the charge. "For our human brothers." Caught between the Talaxians' onslaught and the humans' unyielding defense, the Zorgons faltered. Jeffrey rallied his soldiers, urging them forward. "Now, while they're reeling, drive them out of the city." The humans and Talaxians surged forward as one, blades flashing and rifles thundering. The Zorgons fell back, their lines shattering under the relentless assault. Jeffrey lost himself in the chaos of close-quarters battle, his armor streaked with ichor and his muscles burning with exhaustion. A shadow loomed over him, and Jeffrey spun to find himself facing a towering Zorgon war chief, the alien's armor thick with trophies and battle scars. The war chief bellowed a challenge, mandibles flaring as it raised a crackling energy glaive. Jeffrey bared his teeth in a feral grin, activating the humming power blade sheathed in his gauntlet. "Come on, Big Ugly," he growled. "Let's dance." They came together in a clash of sparks and chitin, the war chief's glaive slamming against Jeffrey's blade with bone-jarring force. Jeffrey staggered back, the servos in his armor whining with strain. The Zorgon was monstrously strong, its blows coming down like meteor strikes. But Jeffrey was fast, his armor-enhanced reflexes letting him slip under the war chief's guard. He landed a flurry of slashes across the alien's chest and thighs, ichor spraying from the rents in its chitin. The war chief roared in fury, renewing its assault with terrifying ferocity. Jeffrey gave ground step by step, his blade flickering as he parried the Zorgon's hammering blows. His muscles burned, his breath coming in ragged gasps inside his helmet. The war chief pressed its advantage, forcing Jeffrey back towards a crumbling wall. At the last second, Jeffrey twisted aside, the glaive's crackling blade missing his head by inches. The war chief's momentum carried it forward, and Jeffrey struck, his blade plunging into the gap beneath the alien's arm. He ripped the blade free in a spray of ichor and buried it to the hilt in the war chief's neck. The Zorgon convulsed, glaive falling from its nerveless claws. It slumped to the rubble-strewn ground, ichor pooling around Jeffrey's feet. He yanked his blade free, chest heaving as he stared down at his vanquished foe. All around him the battle was turning. The Zorgons were in full retreat, fleeing back towards their landing ships as the humans and Talaxians harried them every step of the way. Belos appeared at Geoffrey's side, his armor dented and scorched, but his eyes alight with fierce joy. "We've done it," the Talaxian cried, clasping Geoffrey's shoulder. "The city is saved." Geoffrey nodded wearily, suddenly feeling every ache and bruise. "Thanks to you and your people. I thought Jan had doomed us all." "Not all Talaxians are like him," Belos said solemnly. "Many of us believe in honor, in loyalty. We would not abandon our human comrades." Geoffrey met the alien's eyes, seeing the respect and camaraderie shining there. "I won't forget this, Belos. We're in this together now, until the end." As the humans and Talaxians regrouped in the city's shattered streets, tending to the wounded and gathering the dead, Geoffrey couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope amidst the exhaustion and grief. They had held the line. They had proven that humans and Talaxians could fight and bleed as one, and as long as soldiers like Belos stood with them, maybe humanity had a chance after all. But the battle was nowhere near the end. Beyond the smoke-shrouded city, thousands of Zorgon ships still darkened the skies. Geoffrey knew they would return, more determined than ever to crush the human resistance and grind Talax beneath their claws. He would be ready for them. The last warriors of Earth would fight to their last breath, their last drop of blood. The Zorgons would learn the true meaning of human defiance, even if it took Geoffrey's final act in this strange new universe. Geoffrey stood amidst the ruins of New Thaxis' capital, his armor scuffed and scorched from the brutal battle. Belos approached, his face grave beneath his helmet. "Admiral Jan has declared us traitors," the Talaxian said, his voice tight with anger. "He's ordered my marines to stand down, to abandon you and the city to the Zorgons." Geoffrey clenched his fists, fury burning in his chest. "That cowardly bastard, what will you do?" Belos met Geoffrey's gaze, his black eyes hard as flint. "We will not abandon our human brothers. My soldiers and I will stand with you, Geoffrey, to the bitter end." Geoffrey clasped the Talaxian's arm, a fierce grin splitting his face. "Then let's take the fight to the Zorgons. I have an idea." As the Zorgons regrouped for another assault, Geoffrey gathered his most skilled soldiers, Sergeant Yusef, Private Petrov, Corporal Fung. He outlined his audacious plan. "We're going to infiltrate the Zorgon flagship," Geoffrey said, pointing to a captured Zorgon drop pod. "Disable its command and control systems, throw their fleet into chaos. Belos and his marines will stage a diversion, draw the bug's attention while we slip aboard." Petrov swallowed hard, her face pale. "That's suicide. We'll never make it." Geoffrey gripped her shoulder, his eyes boring into hers. "We have to try. If we can cripple their flagship, it could turn the tide of the whole damn war. The civilians down there are counting on us. We're their last hope." As Geoffrey's squad sealed themselves into the cramped confines of the Zorgon drop pod, the human soldier felt a flicker of trepidation amidst the adrenaline surge. If this gambit failed, they'd all be bug food. The pod shuddered as it launched, streaking up through the atmosphere towards the looming Zorgon fleet. Geoffrey watched through a narrow viewport as Belos's ships engaged the Zorgons, energy beams and missiles crisscrossing the void in a dazzling web of destruction. A trio of massive Zorgon dreadnoughts lumbered into view, their flanks dripping with cannon batteries. Geoffrey watched in horror as they unleashed devastating plasma broadsides against the beleaguered Talaxian fleet, the searing energy bolts shredding through shields and hull plating smoothly. "God help us," Fung whispered, his nucleus tightening on his rifle stock. Geoffrey tore his gaze away from the carnage, focusing on the mission ahead. "Stay sharp, we're coming up on the flagship." The pod shuddered again as it slammed into the Zorgon ship's hull, explosive bolts blasting a jagged entry hole. Geoffrey was first out, rifle up and scanning for targets. A pair of Zorgon guards reared back in shock, mandibles clacking. Then Geoffrey drilled plasma bolts through their skulls. "Move out," he barked, motioning his squad forward. They advanced into the bowels of the alien ship, the cramped corridors echoing with their bootfalls and the distant drumbeat of the raging space battle. A blast door loomed ahead, blocking their path. Jeffrey didn't break stride, activating the cutting torch built into his gauntlet. A searing jet of plasma flared to life, and he slashed it across the door's locking mechanism. The heavy portal groaned open. The chamber beyond was cavernous, filled with pulsing organic cables and chittering Zorgon technicians. In the center squatted a pulsating mass of flesh and circuitry, the ship's command nexus. Jeffrey charged forward, rifle spitting blue fire. "Petrov, Fung, cover our flank. Yusef on me, we're taking that thing down." As plasma bolts streaked past his head and Zorgon screamed and died around him, Jeffrey fought his way towards the nexus, praying that this desperate gamble would be enough to save New Thaxis and turn the tide of the war. Jeffrey and his squad pressed deeper into the bowels of the Zorgon flagship, the thudding of their armored boots echoing through the organic ribbed corridors. The air was thick with the acrid stench of alien musk and ionized plasma, the ship's walls pulsing with a sickly bioluminescent glow. "Hold up," Corporal Fung hissed, raising a fist. "I'm picking up some weird energy readings from behind that bulkhead, something big." Jeffrey nodded, motioning for Petrov to move up and access a nearby computer terminal. The private's armored fingers flew over the organic controls, her face a mask of concentration. "I'm in," she reported, her voice tight. "Looks like some kind of high-security research lab. Genetic data, DNA sequences, experiment logs. Oh my God." "What is it?" Jeffrey demanded, dread coiling in his gut. Petrov looked up, her face ashen. "The Zorgons. They've been experimenting on humans, splicing our genes with their own to create some kind of super soldiers. There's records here of them collecting samples from battlefields all the way back to the Orion War." Yusef spat a curse in Arabic. "Those filthy bugs have been desecrating our war dead for centuries, using our own fallen against us." Jeffrey felt a cold rage settling over him, an icy calm that cut through the chaos of battle. "We put a stop to it, here and now. We find that lab and we burn it to the ground." No sooner had the words left his mouth than a deafening alarm began to blare throughout the ship, the walls flashing with baleful red light. The deck shuddered under the impact of heavy footfalls, a chilling alien roar echoing from the shadows. "They're onto us," Fung yelled, bringing his rifle to bear. "Contacts incoming." A hulking form burst from the darkness, a nightmarish fusion of Zorgon and human. The creature was nearly 10 feet tall, its chitinous exoskeleton threaded with pulsing human musculature. Its skull was a horrific melding of insectoid mandibles and human facial features, its eyes blazing with a feral intelligence. Behind the abomination, a dozen more hybrid soldiers emerged, their twisted bodies overflowing with grafted weapons and organic armor. They let out a ululating battle cry and charged, moving with terrifying speed and agility. Jeffrey opened fire, his plasma bolts sizzling against the lead monster's armored hide. The creature barely flinched, barreling forward with its talons outstretched. All around him, Jeffrey's squad engaged the abominations in a vicious close-quarters brawl. Yusef grappled with a snarling hybrid, his armor groaning as he strained against its unnatural strength. Petrov ducked under a slashing claw, jamming her rifle barrel into a monster's shrieking maw and pulling the trigger. Fung screamed as a hybrid soldier raked its talons across his faceplate, shredding metal and flesh. He fell, blood pooling around his head. Jeffrey dodged a sweeping blow from the massive leader creature, feeling the wind of its passage. He activated the humming power blade in his gauntlet and lunged, burying the searing plasma edge into the monster's neck joint. The creature roared in pain, ichor spraying from the wound. It backhanded Jeffrey with stunning force, sending him crashing into the bulkhead. Stars exploded across his vision, his armor screaming damage alerts. Through the haze of pain, Jeffrey saw Yusef and Petrov fighting back-to-back, surrounded by the remaining hybrids. They were badly outnumbered, their armor dented and scorched. Jeffrey hauled himself upright, shaking his head to clear it. He looked up at the looming abomination, at the grotesque perversion of human features melded into its alien visage. "You Zorgon bastards," he snarled, spitting blood onto the deck. "Violating our dead wasn't enough, was it? You had to twist our very genes, our essence, into these fucking monsters. No more." With a roar of fury, Jeffrey hurled himself at the hybrid leader, power blade flashing. He hacked and slashed with reckless abandon, ichor spattering his armor as he opened gaping rents in the creature's hide. The abomination fought back savagely, its talons ripping into Jeffrey's armor, drawing blood. But Jeffrey was beyond pain, beyond fear. All he knew was the white-hot rage burning in his chest, the need to eradicate this blasphemy against humanity. "This is for every soldier who died fighting you, Zorgon scum," Jeffrey roared, ramming his blade up under the creature's chin with a sickening crunch. "For every desecrated corpse you defiled, die, you motherless abomination." With a final, wrenching twist of his blade, Jeffrey ripped the creature's head from its shoulders. The massive body toppled backwards, ichor gushing from its severed neck. Panting, Jeffrey turned to aid his squad against the remaining hybrids. Yusef was limping badly, one arm hanging useless at his side. Petrov's rifle clicked empty as a snarling abomination bore down on her. Jeffrey charged into the fray, hacking and slashing with renewed purpose. His soldiers rallied around him, their plasma fire stitching glowing holes in the monster's hides. It was a brutal, bloody affair, but in the end, the last hybrid soldier fell twitching to the deck, its skull caved in by Jeffrey's armored boot. The human squad stood amidst the carnage, battered and bleeding, but unbroken. Jeffrey looked down at the dead abominations, his face twisting with disgust and sorrow behind his helmet. So much human potential, so many brave soldiers' legacies, perverted into these mindless killing machines. It was a desecration beyond forgiveness. "Collect their gene seed," he ordered grimly, gesturing to the fallen hybrids. "We'll give what's left of them a proper burial once this is over. They were human once, whatever the Zorgons did to them. They deserved that much." "Aye, sir," Yusef said, his voice rough with emotion. "And the lab?" "We blow it to hell," Jeffrey growled. "Burn every last scrap of Zorgon research. This ends now." With renewed drive, Jeffrey led his squad towards the heart of the ship, where the control nexus awaited. The central corridor was heavily defended, auto-turrets studding the walls, and scores of Zorgon soldiers crouched behind chitinous barricades. As plasma fire filled the air and the deck grew slick with blood and ichor, Jeffrey gritted his teeth and pushed forward. The Zorgons had already defiled humanity's past. He'd be damned if he let them steal its future as well. Jeffrey and his battered squad pressed on towards the heart of the Zorgon flagship, the ship's control nexus. The corridors grew narrower and more heavily defended as they neared their objective, the bulkheads lined with pulsing organic conduits and glowing control panels. The stench of alien musk and ozone hung heavy in the recycled air. "We're close," Corporal Fung said, consulting the schematic on his heads-up display. "The nexus should be just ahead, through those blast doors." Jeffrey nodded, hefting his pulse rifle. "Get that door open. Yusef, Petrov, cover the flanks. I don't want any surprises." As Fung set to work splicing the door controls, Jeffrey couldn't shake the sense of unease crawling up his spine. The Zorgons knew they were coming. Why hadn't they encountered heavier resistance by now? The blast doors groaned open, revealing a cavernous chamber dominated by a towering spire of pulsing flesh and blinking circuitry, the ship's control nexus. And standing before it, flanked by a score of heavily armed Zorgon guards, was a figure that made Jeffrey's blood run cold. It was a Zorgon, but unlike any Jeffrey had seen before. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, its exoskeleton a glossy black threaded with glowing red cybernetic implants. Its eyes burned with a malevolent intelligence, its mandibles twitching in what might have been a smile. "Welcome, Jeffrey Scott," the Zorgon said, its voice a grating electronic buzz. "I am High Commander Zal. I have been expecting you." Jeffrey raised his rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger. "How do you know my name?" Zal chuckled, a sound like gears grinding. "We have been watching you, human, ever since you were revived by the Talaxians. Your species' reputation precedes you." The High Commander paced before the Nexus, its clawed hands clasped behind its back. "I must admit your performance on New Thaxis was impressive. You and your soldiers fight with a savagery and tenacity that is almost Zorgon-like." Jeffrey bristled at the comparison. "We're nothing like you monsters. We fight to protect, not to conquer and enslave." "Ah, but that is where you are mistaken," Jarl said, its eyes glittering. "The Zorgon Empire does not seek mere conquest. Our goal is the subjugation and assimilation of all lesser species, to uplift them to a higher plane of existence." The High Commander gestured to the writhing organic cables of the Nexus. "Behold the fruits of our genetic engineering. Using the DNA we have harvested from 100 conquered worlds, we will create an unstoppable army of hybrid warriors, each one superior to their progenitor species." Jeffrey's mind flashed back to the twisted abominations they had fought in the research lab, the grotesque fusion of human and Zorgon DNA. The thought of an entire army of such horrors made his gorge rise. "And that is where you come in, Jeffrey Scott," Jarl continued, its tone almost conciliatory. "Surrender to us now, and the remaining human soldiers in Talaxian custody will be spared. More than that, they will be elevated, integrated into the Zorgon war machine as an elite cadre of shock troops." The High Commander extended a clawed hand, its expression almost benevolent. "Join us, and together we will usher in a new era of Zorgon supremacy, with humanity as our favored servants. Resist, and you will be exterminated along with the pitiful Talaxians." For a long moment Jeffrey was silent, his mind racing. The Zorgon's offer was tempting, a chance to save his fellow humans, to give them a purpose in this new and hostile galaxy. But the price was too high. Jeffrey met Zarl's gaze, his eyes hard as flint. "I've seen what you do to the species you uplift," he spat, "twisting them, warping them into mindless abominations. That's not elevation, it's damnation." He raised his rifle, aiming it squarely at the High Commander's head. "Humanity will never submit to Zorgon tyranny. Not now, not ever. We'd rather die on our feet than live on our knees." Zixal hissed, its mandibles flaring in anger. "So be it, human. You have sealed your fate and that of your entire species." With a shriek of rage, the High Commander lunged forward, plasma blades flashing from its gauntlets. Its guards surged forward, plasma rifles blazing. Jeffrey and his squad met them head-on, power armor whirring as they clashed with the Zorgon elites. Plasma bolts flew thick and fast, scorching armor and searing flesh. Jeffrey ducked and weaved, his rifle bucking in his hands as he drilled shots into the charging Zorgons. At the center of the melee, Jeffrey and Zal fought in a dizzying blur of slashing blades and hammering blows. The High Commander was terrifyingly fast and strong, its blades leaving glowing scars across Jeffrey's armor. But Jeffrey was fast too, and he had reach on his side. He parried a scything slash and rammed his armored knee into Zal's midsection, doubling the Zorgon over. The High Commander staggered back, hissing in pain. Jeffrey pressed his advantage, raining down blows with the butt of his rifle, cracking Zal's chitinous plating. The High Commander reeled, its guard faltering. With a final desperate lunge, Zal slashed at Jeffrey's throat with a hidden plasma blade. Jeffrey barely managed to jerk aside, the searing edge missing his jugular by millimeters. The blade sliced through his rifle instead, severing it cleanly in two. Jeffrey didn't hesitate. Dropping his ruined weapon, he activated the humming power blade sheathed in his gauntlet and rammed it up under Zal's chin with all his might. The High Commander convulsed, smoke pouring from its mouth as the blade burned through its brain. It slumped to the deck, the light fading from its cybernetic eyes. Around him, the last of the Zorgon guards fell to the humans' relentless onslaught. Jeffrey's squad gathered around him, battered and bloody, but still standing. "The Nexus," Jeffrey said, his breath coming hard. "Fung, Youssef, get to work. Shut this damn ship down." As the two soldiers set to work at the control panels, Jeffrey activated his comm. "Belos, the Zorgon flagship is crippled. Converge all fire on my signal." "Understood," the Talaxian replied, his voice crackling with static. "We're in position and awaiting your word." Jeffrey watched as Feng and Yusef's fingers flew over the organic keyboards, lines of alien code scrolling across the screens. Status? Shields and weapons are offline, Feng reported, his face bathed in the sickly glow of the displays. This bird is dead in space. Signal the fleet, Jeffrey ordered, then set the reactor to overload. It's time to get the hell out of here. As Talaxian ships swarmed towards the stricken Zorgan flagship, Jeffrey and his squad raced back to their captured drop pod. They piled in just as the first plasma beams began slamming into the Zorgan ship's hull, explosions rippling across its surface. Jeffrey sealed the pod's hatch and punched the emergency launch button. The tiny craft blasted free of the flagship's hangar, careening wildly as it tumbled away from the dying ship. Through the viewport, Jeffrey watched as the Talaxian fleet poured fire into the Zorgan vessel, ripping through its unshielded hull. Gouts of flame erupted from rents in its armor, venting atmosphere and bodies into the void. And then, with a final blinding flash, the flagship's reactor went critical. The massive ship vanished in a sun-bright explosion, reduced in an instant to an expanding field of molten debris. Cheers erupted over the comm as Talaxian ships flashed past, mopping up the remaining Zorgan forces. In the chaos, no one noticed the lone drop pod spiraling away into the depths of space. Jeffrey sagged back in his restraints, every muscle burning with exhaustion. It wasn't over, he knew. The Zorgons were far from beaten, and there would be a reckoning for this defeat. Admiral Jean would no doubt brand them all as traitors and mutineers. But for now they had struck a blow for Talax, for humanity, for every species ground beneath the Zorgon's heel. They had shown the galaxy that even an empire as vast and terrible as the Zorgons could bleed. And as long as soldiers like Jeffrey and his squad still drew breath, the fight would go on. Battered and bloody, the last warriors of a lost Earth hurtled into the uncertain future, ready to face whatever came next. As the Zorgon flagship disintegrated into a cloud of debris, the Talaxian fleet surged forward with renewed drive. Their ships darted through the Zorgon formation, targeting the command vessels with precision strikes. The once formidable Zorgon armada faltered, their coordination crumbling without the guidance of their high commander. On the bridge of the Talaxian flagship, Belos watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. "Press the attack," he ordered, his voice steady. "We must not give them a chance to regroup." The Talaxian ships redoubled their efforts, plasma beams and missiles tearing into the Zorgon fleet's exposed flanks. One by one, the enemy vessels winked out, consumed by the relentless onslaught. Meanwhile, Jeffrey's battered drop pod streaked through New Thaxis's atmosphere, the hull glowing cherry red from the heat of re-entry. With a bone-jarring impact, the pod slammed into the war-torn streets of the capital, kicking up a cloud of dust and debris. Jeffrey kicked open the hatch, staggering out into the sunlight. His surviving soldiers emerged behind him, their armor scorched and dented but their weapons at the ready. They scanned the surrounding ruins, tense and alert. The crackle of energy weapons and the chitter of Zorgon warriors echoed through the shattered cityscape. In the distance, Jeffrey could see the flashes of ongoing combat, Talaxian marines locked in a desperate struggle against the remaining Zorgon ground forces. "Let's move," Jeffrey said, checking the charge on his rifle. "Belos and his troops need our help." The humans advanced through the rubble-strewn streets, picking their way past burned-out vehicles and collapsed buildings. As they drew closer to the fighting, the sounds of battle grew louder, punctuated by the cries of the wounded and dying. They rounded a corner and found themselves face to face with a squad of Zorgon soldiers. The aliens crouched behind a makeshift barricade of twisted metal. The Zorgons let out a fierce war cry and opened fire, plasma bolts sizzling through the air. Jeffrey and his soldiers dove for cover, energy beams crackling past their heads. They returned fire, their own weapons spitting blue plasma at the entrenched Zorgons. "Flank them!" Jeffrey shouted over the din of combat. "Petrov, Yusef, lay down suppressing fire. Fung with me!" As Petrov and Yusef poured a steady stream of fire into the Zorgon position, Jeffrey and Fung sprinted along the side of a ruined building, seeking a better angle of attack. They burst from cover, rifles blazing, and caught the Zorgons in a deadly crossfire. The aliens fell, their barricade reduced to molten slag. Jeffrey led his soldiers forward, pressing deeper into the heart of the fighting. Ahead, they could see Belos and his marines engaged in a brutal melee with a horde of Zorgon warriors, the two sides trading blows amidst the wreckage of a collapsed tower. Jeffrey charged into the fray, his power blade flashing as he hacked and slashed at the swarming Zorgons. His soldiers followed close behind, their rifles roaring as they cut down the aliens with ruthless efficiency. Step by step, the humans and Talaxians drove the Zorgons back, the once fearsome warriors now in full retreat without the support of their fleet. The ground was littered with shattered chitin and oozing ichor, the air thick with the stench of death. As the last few Zorgons were dispatched, Jeffrey found himself back to back with Belos, the two warriors panting from exertion. The Talaxian clasped Jeffrey's shoulder, a weary smile on his face. "We did it," Belos said, his voice hoarse. "New Thaxis is safe." Jeffrey nodded, surveying the battlefield with a mix of triumph and sorrow. So many had fallen, human and Talaxian alike, but they had held the line against impossible odds. A chirp from Belos's comm cut through the moment of respite. The Talaxian's eyes widened as he listened to the message, his expression growing serious. "What is it?" Jeffrey asked, a sinking feeling in his gut. Belos met his gaze, his voice grave. "A Talaxian scout ship has detected a massive Zorgon reinforcement fleet entering the system, far larger than the one we just defeated." Jeffrey's blood ran cold. After everything they had endured, all the sacrifices they had made, it still wasn't enough. The Zorgons were coming, and this time they would not be stopped so easily. He looked out over the war-torn city, at the battered but unbroken soldiers around him. Humanity had been given a second chance, an opportunity to reclaim its place in the galaxy. And despite the toll, Jeffrey would not let that chance slip away. The battle for New Thaxis was over, but the war was just beginning. As the ominous shadow of the Zorgon reinforcement fleet loomed ever closer, Jeffrey and Belos huddled over a tactical display, their faces grim. The holographic projection painted a bleak picture, hundreds of enemy ships bearing down on New Thaxis, their numbers far exceeding the battered Talaxian defense force. "We can't beat them, not head-on," Jeffrey said, his voice tight. "They'll rip through us smoothly." Belos nodded, his black eyes calculating. "Agreed, but perhaps there is another way, a way to turn their own weapons against them." Jeffrey looked up sharply. The genetic engineering tech, the super soldiers. "Precisely." Belos tapped a command into the display, bringing up schematics of Zorgon DNA sequences. "If we could modify this genetic code, engineer a bioweapon tailored specifically to Zorgon physiology." "Tight, we could wipe them out from the inside," Jeffrey finished, a glimmer of hope kindling in his chest. "It's a long shot, but it might be our only chance." They set to work immediately, assembling a team of the brightest human and Talaxian scientists. Jeffrey led them to the captured Zorgon labs, the air thick with the acrid stench of preservative fluid and alien chemicals. For hours they labored, splicing genes and reprogramming DNA sequences with single-minded focus. Failure was not an option. Every moment brought the Zorgon fleet closer to annihilation range. As the bioweapon took shape, a gnawing dread settled in Jeffrey's gut. This was untested, unpredictable. If they got it wrong, if the weapon mutated out of control. A sudden tremor rocked the lab, sending equipment crashing to the floor. Alarms blared, red lights pulsing in warning. Jeffrey's comm crackled to life, Belos's voice taut with urgency. "Jeffrey, the Zorgons have entered orbit. They're launching drop pods, thousands of them. We're out of time." Jeffrey clenched his fists, his heart pounding. He turned to his team, their faces pale but determined. "Keep working. I'll buy you as much time as I can." He sprinted from the lab, barking orders into his comm. "Belos, initiate evacuation protocols. Get every civilian off this planet now. All defense forces, fall back to the spaceport. Cover the evac." Chaos reigned in the streets of New Thaxis, terrified civilians scrambling for the spaceport as drop pods rained from the sky like meteors. Talaxian soldiers and human warriors fought side by side, their weapons blazing as they struggled to hold back the tide of Zorgan invaders. Jeffrey raced to the front lines, his rifle spitting blue fire. He saw Sergeant Yusef grappling with a snarling Zorgan warrior, saw Petrov dragging a wounded Talaxian to safety under a hail of plasma bolts. "Hold the line," Jeffrey roared, blasting a charging Zorgan to bloody fragments. "We just need a little more time." But time was slipping away like sand through his fingers. The Zorgons pressed forward relentlessly, an unstoppable chitinous tide. Jeffrey could hear the screams of the dying, the sizzle of flesh and armor succumbing to plasma fire. And then, a miracle. His comm beeped, the voice of the lead scientist crackling through the din of battle. "Commander, the bioweapon is ready. But we have a problem. We need to introduce it directly into the Zorgan ship's life support systems for maximum effectiveness." Jeffrey didn't hesitate. "Send me the weapon, I'll get it where it needs to go." Velos cut in, his words clipped and urgent. "Jeffrey, that's suicide, let me—" "Negative, this is a human weapon. It's only fitting we be the ones to deliver it." Jeffrey took a shuddering breath. "Get our people to safety, Belos. It's been an honor." He gathered his surviving soldiers, Yusef, Petrov, Fung, a scant handful of others, warriors to the end. They armed themselves with the bioweapon canisters and explosive charges, grim purpose etched on their faces. As the last civilian transport streaked away into the sky and the Talaxian ships withdrew, Jeffrey and his team made their final stand. They fought like demons, carving a path through the Zorgon ranks with the fury of the damned. One by one they fell, buying precious seconds with their lives. Yusef torn apart by Zorgan claws as he lobbed a biocanister into a dropship's exhaust vent. Petrov vaporized by a plasma bolt as she primed the detonator on her explosive charge. In the end, only Jeffrey remained, battered and bleeding, surrounded by a ring of Zorgan corpses. He stared down the barrels of a dozen plasma rifles, a fierce grin on his face as he thumbed the detonator switch. "Burn in hell, you alien bastards!" The world vanished in fire and light, the explosions consuming Jeffrey and the Zorgon soldiers alike. But as the flames washed over him, he felt a grim satisfaction. The bioweapon was away, seeding itself into the Zorgon ships like a virulent plague. Across the Zorgon fleet, warriors convulsed and died, their bodies liquefying as the engineered virus ravaged their systems. Ships went dark, life support failing as the bioweapon did its grisly work. In mere hours, the once mighty armada was reduced to a graveyard of drifting hulks. The Zorgon threat ended in a final audacious attempt. In the aftermath, as the Talaxian fleet emerged from hiding to mop up the scattered survivors, Belos stood on the bridge of his flagship, his head bowed in grief. The cost had been staggering, the sacrifices almost too much to bear. But as he looked out at the stars, he felt a flicker of hope amidst the sorrow. Jeffrey and his soldiers had given everything, not just for Talax but for the future of all free species. Their courage, their unwavering dedication in the face of certain death would be remembered for generations. "We'll tell their story," Belos vowed solemnly. "We'll make sure the galaxy never forgets what humanity did here today." And with that promise, the Talaxians began the long, slow process of rebuilding, the memory of Earth's last heroes forever etched in their hearts. The battle was over, the war finally won. But the legend of Jeffrey Scott and his valiant stand would endure, a shining beacon of hope in a galaxy that had known too much darkness for too long. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.